Hey everybody, it's Ed. Before we get started, I want to thank Dylan O'Hare for becoming a new Patreon supporter. Patreon is monthly support for the podcast, and there are a lot of benefits that come with that, including once a month behind-the-scene email newsletter. I've started doing monthly videos for Patreon supporters, and you get discounts to the Mountain and Prairie store, stickers, all that kind of stuff. If you want to learn more about Patreon or other options, go to mountainandprairie.com/support. Thanks a lot to Dylan, as well as the hundreds of other folks who've been kind enough to support the podcast over the years. Thank you. Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation, or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Alvin Dedeaux. Alvin is a renowned Austin-based fly fishing guide who's one of the Lone Star State's most sought-after experts in the pursuit of everything from Guadelupe Bass in central Texas to redfish on the Texas coast. Alvin's an ambassador for well-known brands such as Howler Brothers and Yeti, and he's twice been a finalist for Orvis's Guide of the Year award. And on top of all that, Alvin produces informative and entertaining videos on his popular YouTube channel, where anglers of all experience levels can learn from Alvin's decades of experience. Alvin was born and raised in Houston, and he's been a committed fisherman, hunter, and all-around outdoorsman for as long as he can remember. At age 12, he began teaching himself to fly fish, and what started as a hobby quickly became one of the most important aspects of his life. Alvin's personal story has many fascinating chapters, and each one could be its own 3-hour podcast episode. He's owned a construction company, been a singer in a very successful touring band, worked at the world-famous Austin Angler, and is now the head guide and owner of All Water Guides. With a background like that, it's no surprise that Alvin has become one of the most well-known fly guides in the country. Alvin and I connected virtually and had a fun, hour-long conversation about all aspects of his life and career. We started out chatting about his upbringing in Texas and how fly fishing has been a mainstay of his life throughout all its various stages. We talk about his decision to leave college to pursue life as a business owner and his path to becoming professionally involved in fishing. We talk about his formative years working at the Austin Angler and how that particular shop started the careers of some of the country's most well-respected guides. He offers excellent insights into finding one's dream job, the importance of conservation in Texas, and how COVID has affected Texas's valuable fishing resources. We also talk about his popular YouTube channel and why he devotes so much time and energy towards sharing his wisdom. And as you'd expect, Alvin offers up some excellent book and music recommendations. I really enjoyed talking to Alvin, but I felt like we only scratched the surface of his wildly unique life. Be sure to check out the episode notes for tons of links to everything we discuss. Hopefully Alvin and I can do a part 2 at some point in the future, but until then, enjoy this fun conversation with Alvin Dedeaux. I was thinking, how do we start out this conversation? Because there's so much I wanted to ask you, and I think a lot of people that will listen to this know some of your story, but I think there's some folks who your story may be new to them. So, at the risk of not being too boring, I'd love to just start out with where you grew up, because people are going to hear this and going to be like, "Who are these two guys with the Southern accents?
Yeah,
what's going on?" They know my story, but where did you grow up?
I was born and raised in Houston, Texas, Bayou City. And it was a while ago. So where I lived in Houston was sort of like the edge of civilization. So from the time I was old enough, I was able to leave my parents' house and either walk or bicycle to someplace I could go fishing or hunting, depending on time of year. So really, really fortunate. And my dad was a big hunter and fisherman. My grandparents were both fisher. I guess we should call them anglers because not fishermen, obviously my grandmother. So yeah, I was just really lucky. And that was one of the things that I did with my with my family for recreation from as young as I could remember was going fishing, going hunting, and it's just kind of been a constant thing in my life for as long as I can remember. So really fortunate that it's actually turned into something that sustains my lifestyle. I never would have imagined that as a kid in Houston, fishing in the bayou, catching sunfish and frying them up and eating them. But here I am. It's where I got the accent too.
I grew up in Eastern North Carolina, and I grew up, fishing and not super hardcore, but I was into it. And then at some point I decided I wanted to learn how to fly fish. But I remember at that point, it was like a mysterious thing that you had to figure out how to do it. And you had to go to the library and find books or order books. And there was nobody I knew who did it. And it just seemed like so much more complicated. But eventually I figured it out. But I was wondering how you came to fly fishing, because me and you are a little older than some of these folks that are listening to this, and that was before the internet, and you had to really work to figure some of this stuff out. So how did fly fishing enter your life?
Kind of the same way. Sounds like I read about it in a book at school, and I remember it was a little red fishing book. It's funny because I've told this story a million times, but it is kind of like my origin story when it comes to fly fishing. But yeah, I was 11. And, I read everything I could find about fishing in general. And I found this red book on fishing. And there was a chapter toward the end with fly fishing. And I was like, wow, that sounds cool. I think I need to figure out how to do that. And so I told my parents that's what I wanted for my 12th birthday was a fly rod. And somehow or another, they found me a fly rod. It was I still remember to this day, it was a Eagle Claw 7-weight fiberglass with a Martin reel and a level line. And I taught myself how to cast. I taught myself how to tie a few flies, and I caught fish on that thing. And, like I said earlier, somehow or another, I was fortunate enough to turn that into basically my life's work, and never would have imagined that at 11 when I was reading that book at school. But that was the thing that started the spark that started the fire. And here I am a lot of years later.
So when I was preparing for this interview, I was reading up everything I could find on you, and there's a lot of cool articles, and obviously all your stuff on YouTube is so fun and informative to look at. But I read that you decided to go to Austin to go to University of Texas for a year, and then you got there and you realized, this isn't for me. Can you talk about that process of going there and just kind of what you were hoping to get out of it, but then kind of the reality of it? Because I'm always interested when folks have I think a lot of people, including myself, have this idea, well, I got to go to college, I got to do this, and this is the path I got to take. And personally, when I got to college, I didn't connect with it, but I thought, man, I got to finish this. And so I'm always interested to how folks have the guts to be like, all right, this isn't for me. I'm going to go do something else. Can you talk about that process?
Yeah, that's funny. I was just thinking about that yesterday, and how that all panned out. So I was not a stellar high school student. I finished right in the middle of my class of like 540, 550 students. And so I was okay. I got accepted to UT and Texas A&M, and I was probably could have flipped a coin and gone to either one, but I had friends that were going to UT, and I'd spend a little bit of time in Austin when I used to work at the Boy Scout camp, and on weekends we'd come to Austin, as a 15, 16-year-old with like these college students and go party. So I was like, yeah, I think Austin seems like a little bit more fun. So, like I said, so I could have flipped a coin and ended up in Austin or A&M. But I got here and I was in the engineering school, mechanical engineering specifically. And I remember the first year I was on the dean's list. I made a 4.0 that first semester. But then I think I was still doing okay through the first year, but I just realized, like, man, this is not what I want to do with the rest of my life, which is pretty amazing that I figured that out at such a young age. And I remember calling my parents and tell them like, look, I'm not gonna drop out of school, but I'm not gonna be an engineer. And I had 5 younger sisters, so I figured the money that they were sending for me to go to school would probably be better spent on, on somebody else. And so I said, I'm going to get a job and I'm going to keep going to school. We'll see what happens. Definitely not going to be an engineer. And I remember my dad was like, well, thanks, son. Stay out of trouble. Because he's like, I got these 5 other kids I got to pay for. So, thanks for the heads up. But so I did continue to go for a while. Never got a degree, probably pulled together enough hours I probably could have, but it just didn't really seem like it was going anywhere. I mean, it was fun. So I remember at one point I stopped and said, okay, well, I got to get a job. So my dad had a construction company. I'd worked for my dad for years as a kid. So I got into that business, and I was actually making really good money, hired a bunch of my friends to work for me, and got in trouble with my taxes because, I was a 20-something-year-old kid making a lot of money and not paying my taxes. I was buying cars and hanging out and just, having fun. But I was also got into the music business as well. I sang in a band for a number of years in Austin, which is another kind of Austin thing to do. But the whole time I was always fishing. I was always thinking about fishing. And after the construction gig went away, I was doing pretty well in the music business, paying my rent, singing in a band, traveling the country, got a record deal, and just decided like, man, this still is not exactly what I want to do. And I was kind of mulling over my life choices one day at the fly shop, which is where I spent a lot of my time when I wasn't, on the road with this band, or before that when I was working my regular gig. And I was just kind of telling Larry, the guy that owned the Austin Angler, like, yeah, man, I'm thinking about doing this. I'm thinking about doing that. I really can't decide. And he's like, why don't you work at the shop? And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, he goes, I've been thinking like, man, that Alvin guy would be great to work here. But he's like, he always seemed like he had something more exciting to do. And it was funny because to me, making a bunch of money running a construction business, or, partying all around the country and not having a day job and being in a band, those things were much less exciting than working at the fly shop. So I was like, I'm in. Hell yeah. So it was a long, kind of drawn out path to me working in the fly fishing industry, even before guiding. And the guiding thing happened working at the shop because this guy, Larry, that owned the Austin Angler, Larry Sunderland, he's an absolute angel. And he encouraged me and a couple of other guys at the shop to start guiding to make more money. Because he's like, I pay you guys as much as I can, but you deserve more. And if you guide, then I think that's another way for you to supplement your income. And so I just kind of started guiding while I was working there. And, long story short, the shop closed down. I'd already been guiding part-time for probably close to 10 years at that point. And when, it was kind of time to do something else, it was pretty easy at that point. I was like, well, I'm just going to guide full-time, So I hit the ground running.
Yeah.
The crazy thing is, like I said, I was thinking about this yesterday. I've just been so lucky that my life path has just kind of kept going down this same kind of weird trajectory that I would have never have anticipated. There's no formula, there's no plan, there's no, degree program for becoming a fly fishing guide. So I kind of had to make it up, get lucky, kind of, bounce off the right corners at the right time and end up where I am. I think now with the internet and all this stuff, it's a much easier path to get on and kind of follow and you kind of see where it's going to end up, or you hope it's going to end up. But man, I feel like and Larry, my old boss, would say, there's no such thing as luck, because I always say that I always say, man, I'm so lucky that the things worked out the way they did. But there's a lot of hard work and a lot of sacrifice in there. But it was just something that I always loved it. So the sacrifice and the hard work didn't really seem like sacrifice or hard work. Like if I'd have felt the same way about the mechanical engineering school, I would be a badass mechanical engineer right now, but I just didn't love it. And it did feel like a struggle and a sacrifice. So, so here I am.
Well, I want to talk about, go back to music, because I think it's fun. Even in the articles I read about you, you glaze over this music thing. And that was like, I mean, you could write 10 books about that one chapter of your life. And so we'll come back to that, but talk about the Austin Angler more, because from what I've read and just some of the different folks that I know or am friends with friends of, it seems like that was a pretty magical place to be back then. And like for example, JT Van Zant, who's one of your buddies, and I don't know him personally, but we got a lot of mutual friends, and you, and it just seems like that there was a lot of really cool stuff going on in that shop at that time, and a lot of folks went off to do really interesting things. So can you talk more about your time there, like kind of what you learned and how any lessons learned that have carried over into your career today?
So that place really, that was definitely the stepping stone to the next level. And I've, if I had more time, or if I was more of a cinematographer, I would make a documentary about the Austin Angler. I've been pushing people like somebody needs to do a movie about that fly shop, because so it opened sometime in the 80s. And if I was faster with my math, it closed in July of 2004 after a 23-year run. So that's pretty impressive for a fly shop in Austin, Texas at that time period. It was they played an Austin Angler commercial during the Super Bowl, like in the 80s, late 80s, about, it was one of the first "They Don't Take American Express" commercials. And, I think that's probably where I discovered it. And that was kind of one of my first places I really started spending time when I moved to Austin. And yeah, there was so many people that came through there, like you talk about JT, but also Dave Mangum. He was a regular customer there, and he moved off to Florida and did his thing. One of the other guys who worked with us, Joey Lynn, he's been an outfitter in Argentina basically since the shop closed in '04. He started going to Argentina. So he was outfitting trips to Argentina in, the late 90s. So he's been at it for a long time, kind of one of those unsung heroes. One of the many owners of the Austin Anglers, this guy, Jim Adams, who was married to Mina Hemingway, Ernest Hemingway's granddaughter. They owned the shop for years, and of course Mina, she's gone off and done all the cool Hemingway stuff that we all wish we could do. But her husband Jim is the owner of Adams and Sons, which is a pretty high-end fly shop fixture business. So like if you spend any time in the Bozeman Angler up in Bozeman, all the wood stuff, the stuff in there, Jim made. Jim did a bunch of stuff for Sims, like when Sims used to send out the fancy wooden hangers and stuff that maybe they still do. I don't know. Jim made all that stuff. So there was just a lot of different people, a lot of creativity. Joe Robinson, one of the guys who worked there forever, he was a good buddy of Dave Whitlock's, and so he traveled around the country with Dave, and he invented all these cool techniques. The Zappa Gap fly line connection for gluing leaders into the end of your fly line. Just there was a whole lot of stuff going on, and Austin, I think, was at that time a lot of the stuff that was helping Austin become, the live music capital of the world. Also, I think helped us, become the fly anglers that we are, because it was a cheap place to live. There was water everywhere. We had a river flowing right through the middle of town that had fish in it. There were all these streams out in the Texas Hill Country that nobody was fishing. The Texas coast was only a few hours away, and my salary at the Angler paid my rent and paid for any fishing trips I wanted to go on. And the cost of living was so cheap that it was no problem to say, all right, I'm going to not work for the next month because I'm going to save my money for 2 weeks and then I'm going to go fishing for a month. It was just a magical time and a magical place. And yeah, like I said, the people that, everybody, of course, has heard of JT and David and myself, but there were a bunch of other people that came through there that have done some pretty cool stuff in the industry and are continuing to do so. And, it was a weird place because it was upstairs in downtown Austin when downtown Austin was kind of a bad part of town, but it was close to the lake and the rent was cheap. So that's why the guys opened it there. And that's where I spent a lot of my time before working there. And, of course, the 10 or 12 years I was working there.
Did you realize it was that special at the time? Like at in the moment, were you like, there's something special going on here? Or is it you were just in the moment doing your thing, and now looking back, it's like, wow, there was some cool stuff.
There were definitely moments where it was pretty cool. It was pretty obvious. I think we all were pretty happy being there. Like I said, the environment was good. It was a bunch of folks that were all into fishing and hunting. Mike Thompson, who was long time Patagonia rep, he actually had an office that was adjacent to the angler, so he was there. Yvonne Chenard would roll through every once in a while. So it was a pretty magical place, a pretty magical time. So I think we all were, even if not like conscious of it every day, I think most of the time we realized that we were pretty lucky, and I know I certainly did. I had a few jobs that were not cool, so I knew that this one was pretty cool, even if it was just the job part of it was pretty cool. But just some of the characters that came through there, and just the fact that even though we had a pretty good clientele, the majority of the people were traveling to fish. So people were going all over the world. I mean, the first time the Vermilion brothers did their Mongolia trip for the Taman, like the first season they did that, they went on tour, and did the slide shows, and they came to the Austin Angler. We sent several of our clients there on some of the first trips to Mongolia. We had people, I remember, it would have been back in the 90s, going and doing the Kamchatka trips to Russia, so a lot of the beginnings of a lot of the stuff that's commonplace. I mean, I don't know how commonplace fishing for Taman is, but something that everybody's heard of. There were people in Austin who were going and doing all that stuff. So yeah, it was pretty cool.
So obviously, I mean, you've spent so much of your time focused on Texas and Texas water, but there was a pretty good chunk of time where you were coming up this way to Colorado. And so how did Colorado get in your sights enough to where you wanted to guide up this way?
I that first year after the angler shut down, like I said, it was July, and me and Ben Wallace, who was the last employee at the Angler, he knew that I was going on a fishing trip. And he's like, dude, I don't have a job. Can I go on a trip with you? And I was like, sure. He'd just gotten a new pickup truck. I'm like, let's take your truck. And he's like, all right. And he's like, well, when are we coming back? And I was like, I don't know. When we run out of money. So we took off. And Ben had actually worked in Vail at one of the shops. I can't remember, before he worked at the Angler. So we rolled through there and actually got offered jobs that summer. And both of us were like, man, we just left a job. We're out of here. Thanks for the offer, but we got plenty of money to keep going. And so that just kind of put that in my back pocket. And I'd actually met Bill Perry, who was the guy that owned Fly Fishing Outfitters, and that was the Orvis shop in Beaver Creek. So when I got back to Austin, weeks later, got set up and started guiding full time in Austin. And it's just the first time I was guiding full time after the shop closed down that fall, and started getting close to summer and started getting hot. And I just thought, I don't have to stay in Texas for the summer. It's like maybe my least favorite time of year. So I just called Bill and said, "Hey, Bill, will you give me a job if I come up there this summer?" And he's like, "Hell yeah, come on up, bring all your Texas clients, and yeah, you're in there." So I did, and I did that for I think about 10 summers. And it was great, because especially then I had no responsibilities, had no wife, no kids, no mortgage payment. So I would just pack everything up and, head to Colorado. Initially, I was going like maybe June 15th, staying till the end of September, just hitting the whole summer and then getting a little bit of personal fishing time afterwards. And it worked out really well. I learned a lot. I got a lot of information, working at a fly shop, working at a serious, really busy guide service. A lot of stuff that works for me now, a lot of the stuff that I learned back then. So yeah, it was a good time. But eventually I got married, had a kid. I was still coming to Colorado summers. My wife, actually, one of the first times I met her, she was living in Vail. My first season guiding there, actually, yeah. And she'd lived in Denver. She still has family in Denver. So, she would come up and hang out, but she wasn't able to stay the whole summer. And I had, started this guide service, and I was actually booking trips with other guides in Texas while I was in Colorado. So I was kind of like, maybe I should just stay home. I can do those trips, and I'm not paying the outfitter, so I'm making more money, so I don't have to work as much for the same amount. So that sounded great. The only thing I was going to miss was the wonderful, Colorado weather during the summer. Yeah. But I'm a Texan. It didn't take me long to reacclimate to the summers. So yeah, I got back here, and I go trout fishing occasionally, but not nearly as much as I used to. And the summers aren't as bad as I thought they were. As a matter of fact, I think I complain more now about our Texas winters than I do about the summers, which is ridiculous, but it's true.
That's great. I think a lot of people, myself included, you look at fishing guides and fishing outfitters, or even, hunting guides, hunting outfitters, you're like, man, that's the life. But it is a tough business, and it's competitive, and there's a lot more to it than just being a good angler. I mean, you're running a business, you got to operate all, you got employees, and you got to figure out all the QuickBooks and the taxes and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so, like, how long did it take you to feel like, just from like a business standpoint, like, all right, I think I'm on solid ground here. Like, I got a good business going? Because I would imagine, with kids and wife and all that, it takes on a whole, at least in my experience, everything takes on a whole different meaning. So, to the outside looking in, like, you're firing on all cylinders. But like, how long did it take you to be like, all right, this is sustainable. This is a job I can do. This is a good business I got going.
Oh, probably like last week sometime, maybe.
Hopefully next month.
Yeah. No, it's funny. It took me, I think, when my wife said, okay, we're good, then I'm like, okay, we're good. Because I'm really good with coming up with these ideas and these plans and setting stuff in motion. But, really, like, the day-to-day grind of making things practical is definitely more her skill set. And, when she got to the point to where she's like, okay, I feel comfortable, our financial situation makes me able to sleep at night without worrying, that's when I felt good. I have, I guess, had the skill, or the maybe it's not a skill, maybe it's a fault, but I've always been kind of like, man, let's just go for it. Just make it happen. Just whatever happens, we'll deal with the consequences later. Just like, I'm going to do this. Hopefully it's going to work out, because I'm going to do it one way or the other. Which I think is, you kind of have to have a little bit of that, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, if you're going to do something that doesn't have a set plan, like do A, then do B, then do C, and then, you'll get this result. I think that is one of the things that has made me be able to be successful at this is just a kind of like, well, I don't give a damn. I'm just going for it attitude. But I definitely have noticed in the last couple of years, I don't, used to be like any trip that came down the line, if I was open, I would do it. And I mean, I would do like, people say, how many days a year do you guide? And those, some years it was easier to like figure out how many days a year I didn't guide because, I was guiding the vast majority of those days. And because I was always like, well, what if I got to do this trip? What if that's the last one that comes down the line, So I definitely do not have that mentality. I got no problem with taking time off and chilling out at the house, doing stuff with my wife and the kids. And that's probably been, I'd say, the last couple of years. So figure I started, full time, nothing but guiding in '04. And what is it? So maybe 2020. So 16 years of doing it before I felt like, okay, I'm good.
Overnight success in 16 years.
Yeah, man. And that was I was lucky. I had that little on ramp of working at the guide service and getting a salary every month and building up my clientele before I actually had to jump in with both feet. So once again, thanks to Larry and Austin Angler for making the plunge a little bit easier to take. But yeah, still 16 years.
And one of the things that I love about everything you do, and I think most people who are familiar with you, is both your social media and your just kind of online presence, especially with YouTube. And I feel like you're just extremely generous with your knowledge and with your positivity and just kind of the fun of that you bring to the sport of fly fishing. And so when did that become a focus? Because it's not like you're advertising yourself at all. You're providing this very valuable knowledge to people and making their days better and, giving them a peek into what you're doing or giving them a peek into your brain and all this, decades of knowledge you have about fishing. But I would imagine at the same time that is good advertising for the business as well. So like, when did you decide to go all in on the YouTube and social media, and how do you think about that?
Initially, it definitely was like a marketing thing. I had gotten to where I was probably as busy as I wanted to be pre-social media. I remember buying magazine ads, to promote my business. And by the time the internet and the social media stuff started happening, I was in pretty good shape. But I just enjoy kind of the game of it, So I remember like buying Google AdWord placements, back in the days to promote the business, because I did. When I started the guide service, I felt like, okay, I need to make this work, both because I felt like it would financially benefit me because, I can only work so many days a year, but if I can do something to generate some other income so I don't have to work 300 days a year, that's great. But then at the same time, I really appreciated the help that people gave me, made it easier for me to do this. So I felt like, okay, I have a responsibility to other folks who are trying to follow this path to share my knowledge, to make it easier for them. And, because as much as people like to say, oh, he's a self-made man. He did it on his own. He's smart. He figured it out. It's not true. Like I didn't come up in a vacuum, and I just feel like if I help somebody else out, that's just some karma points for me. And it just seems like it's the right thing to do. And part of it, like I've gotten a lot of in the last couple of years, a lot of folks have reached out to me. It's like, okay, well, you're one of the few black men that are in this industry who has been successful up to this point anyway. And I feel like that is something I have a responsibility to just put my face out there. It's one of those things. Like if you see somebody who looks like you, who's doing something that you want to do, it just makes it a little bit easier. You can say, oh, well, if that guy can do it, then I can do it. So I do feel a responsibility in that regard. And I don't know. I mean, it's this stuff is so cool. It's like people don't really think about it like this a lot, but it's like back in the days, I hope that maybe I would have been one of the first people to write a book and print it and put it out there publicly, because this is just an evolution of, human technology, so the printing press, and now we got the internet. So I just want to be out there, and if this stuff ends up being nothing more than, a history lesson for my kids, so they can see this and go like, man, Dad, he was, he was pretty out there. But, I just feel like, like doing this podcast, it's a totally different format for, sharing ideas and information. And if I say something that gives somebody a little spark, who knows, somebody may invent something that revolutionizes fly fishing or revolutionizes how we do, whatever we do, so I don't know. I just feel like sharing information, ideas, and helping people out is just the right thing to do, but it's also fun. I'm having a good time doing it. So,
well, it shows. I mean, I just love everything about what you do. And I think about myself, like we were talking about at the beginning of this thing, when I was, in middle school in Eastern North Carolina and wanted to fly fish, but couldn't figure out how to do it. Like if I could have had access to your brain and watch those videos, and that's one of the reasons I started this podcast. I've started saying it almost ad nauseum, but like when I was 23 years old and I was wearing a suit and going to work in North Carolina at Merrill Lynch, trying to be a grown up. And I was like, this doesn't fit. And so the whole point of this podcast is like, find all these cool people like you and everybody else I've had on here so that the 23-year-old version of myself could listen to that and be like, there's a different path here. So I appreciate it. It's the spirit of everything you do online is like super generous. And, I mean, I can't imagine the cool feedback you must get on it all. Cause it's,
there's some cool feedback. I'll this was pre-internet. And this was a cool thing that happened to me, years ago when I was guiding, up in Colorado. Had a group of like corporate, commercial real estate group from Dallas, and a bunch of guys were all out fishing. And one of the guys was like, dude, I recognize you from somewhere, And I'm like, we're about the same age. I was like, well, do you used to hang out at the nightclubs in Deep Ellum in Dallas? And he's like, oh, that's it. He'd actually seen my band a bunch of times. Yeah. And so, it was like, oh, that's cool. And so we exchanged emails, and I was like, keep in touch. And I completely forgot about it. And I'd say maybe a year and a half later, I get an email from this guy, and he's like, dude, he goes, I got to tell you, I fished with you, and I'm thinking, this dude used to be in a band, and now he's a fly fishing guy. And he goes, I've always wanted to be in a band. And so he's like, so now I'm commercial real estate dude by day and singer in a rock band by night in Dallas. And he's like, you inspired me to start a band. And I was like, no way. And this guy's like, probably 40 something years old, but he just went for it. And I was like, awesome. And so those kind of little things like that, like totally made my month when I got that email from that guy. So yeah, it is. It does make you feel good when you put something out there and it helps somebody else be happy or be successful. Like I said, I mean, I feel really lucky that, what I guess at the time probably seemed like a failure, dropping out of college. I feel really lucky that I had that failure because that enabled me to get on this other path.
Yeah.
I didn't finish my degree and get a job at some engineering firm and have to spend 10 years before I realized, like, this sucks. I don't want to do this anymore. I didn't have to put the suit on and go to Merrill Lynch. I was able to bypass that whole step. So I feel lucky in that regard. So once again, I feel like, okay, well, maybe I got to put it out there because I might help somebody else. I might help somebody avoid 10 years of being miserable.
All right, so you know who you are listening, sitting at Merrill Lynch. Quit your job right now.
Oh man, that's another one I get like, oh man, I want to get into this guiding thing, but I got this job at Merrill Lynch or wherever, and it's a tough one though, because it's you're definitely going to set yourself up for some potentially tough times in the meantime. So it's hard to make that leap. That's why I say I feel lucky, because I never got anywhere before I decided to get on this path. I didn't have to like drop my job or tell my wife we weren't going to be able to make our mortgage payment, But so that's one of the things that I tell some of the younger guys that are coming up, who are guiding, maybe they're guiding part-time or they're thinking about going somewhere else and guiding. I'm like, dude, just do it. Like, do it sooner rather than later, jump sooner. Don't wait till the train's going 100 miles an hour before you try to jump off. Jump off while it's still going 20. Maybe you break a leg, but you probably won't die.
Well, and I think what you said, and you've said it here, and then I read it in some of your interviews online, is like, it's not like everything is like when you're in love with what you're doing, like with how you are. It's not like every day is like, you're just like, this is the greatest day of my entire life. I mean, there are hard days, like, when the weather's bad or whatever, like, but what I found, at least like with this podcast, which I love doing, is I'll bust my ass on this thing. Like the other night I was up till 3 a.m. editing one of these things. And I was like, there are very few things in life that I would stay up till 3 a.m. doing. And like, it's hard and it kind of sucks and I'm tired and all this stuff, but I still do it and I enjoy it. I feel good about it. And it seems like that's how you approach with your guiding is like, yeah, I mean, it's a job, it's hard, and I think that's what people need to understand is like, if once you find something you really like doing, yeah, it's still hard, but you'll bust your ass to do it, and you're kind of happy for the opportunity to do that. You know what I mean?
Reminds me of something, a comment I heard from, I don't know what your profanity policy is. It's not an F. Okay.
Rip it, let it rip.
So we were talking about guiding and all that stuff, and one of my buddies, and this is not a direct quote, but it's a quote from Joey Lynn, my friend that's an outfitter down in Argentina, and he was telling another friend who was just getting into guiding, and this friend was like, oh man, I'm so excited about this, and this is great. I finally found my calling, and Joey, he's he's like the ultimate devil's advocate, but he's always right, and he's kind of like, well, so what are you going to do when your client does this or your client does that, and this happens or that happens, and and the other guy was like, oh man, why you got to take the joy out of it for me? And Joey's like, I'm not taking the joy out of it for you. I'm making it real. He goes, that's just how it is. And he said, I eat shit for breakfast, but I love it. And he's talking about dealing with his clients. It's like, so I was like, that's a classic Joey line. I eat shit for breakfast, but I love it. And that's kind of how it is sometimes, like you say, you're staying up till 3 o'clock editing stuff. I mean, I'll do the same thing, working on these videos and stuff, but I love it, and I love the process, and I love the final product, and then I love the feedback you get when people are like, oh, that was good. I like that. That made me happy, or same thing with your clients, you're grinding it out. You're trying to figure out some kind of way to, put them on a fish, everything's going wrong, but you persevere, and it doesn't always happen, but sometimes you persevere and you end up having a good day on the water, and just the smile on your client's face when they realize like, oh, I was about to go home empty-handed, but I got a couple of fish, so yeah, it's just, there's, it's not like, you love the work so much that I guess you would continue to do it even if you got no positive feedback, but the positive feedback sure does make, eating shit all day, it makes it taste a lot better.
Well, and I think like you said earlier, it's worth noting, some people love working at Merrill Lynch, and they love being, or they love being an engineer. And so I'm not saying you got to be doing some crazy, like, it's just, you got to find that thing that you love doing and you're willing to bust your ass for and eat shit for.
Yeah.
I think I love hearing that, man. Another question, kind of a more a more direct question about the times we're in right now. How did COVID, two questions about COVID. How did it affect your business? And then how has it affected the pressure on this limited resource, these fisheries we have? Because at least I work in conservation during the day when I'm not doing this podcast. And we saw, when COVID hit, all the trailheads around here just got swamped. And it's good to see because it's like people getting outside, they're reconnecting with being outdoors. But it's, there's limited parking spots, there's limited space on these trails, and it got flooded. And so when COVID hit, how has that affected just kind of your general business and life in the outdoors?
So initially when it hit, we were super, super cautious. We shut everything down. We weren't doing any trips for probably about 6 weeks, like nothing. We didn't leave the house. Mm-hmm. But the phone kept ringing and we kept getting more and more emails, and we never made a public proclamation that we were back open for business. We just kind of started doing a few trips here and there. And when it became obvious that outdoor activities were some of the best things to do, during this whole COVID thing, we just got super, super busy, just like anything else outdoors related. So we were just slammed. And, so we're very grateful that we happen to be in an industry that benefited from this, because, I have lots of friends who are in other industries that did not benefit, and I felt terrible for them. But we were able to, just keep on trucking. We're not the most social people anyway, my wife and I both have spent many a night, closing bars down for years and years. And so this life that we have now is pretty, family and around the house centered, so kind of the whole social distancing thing wasn't that, we've been ordering groceries online for years. Ever since that was an option, we've been doing it because we're like, we don't want to go stuck in a grocery store. It was a little tough on the kids, the homeschool stuff. But one kid's back in school and the other kid is doing online school still. And the kid who's back in school, 2 years out of school, she jumps right back in. She's making A's and B's. So nice. That's a success story. And the other kid, I think I'm getting off on a sidetrack here, but we actually, our 24-year-old did 2 years of high school online. So she's 24 years old now. So that was a while ago. So I say my wife has experience with the online school thing, and with her education and her teaching background, she's been great. So the kids have not really suffered, other than they're not being able to see their friends as much. But, as far as our personal lives, we did great, business wise, personal life wise, we have done really well during the pandemic. Seeing people out on the water. Like I remember I was telling somebody down at the coast last summer, a Wednesday crowd was like a Saturday crowd previously,
Yeah.
And, I always say that it's just sort of a double-edged sword. Yeah, there's more people out there. There's more pressure on the resources, but hopefully there's more people that ultimately are going to be concerned about the resources. A lot of these people may continue to be out there and do this stuff. That's good. I think a lot of people are probably going to realize, I don't really like getting up early and going fishing. I actually kind of like closing the bar down at 2 a.m. So I'm just going to go back to doing that. I think there will be some fall off. We haven't really noticed it as far as our business goes. We still continue to be pretty busy. It's a tough call, and I know people are upset about seeing more people out there on the water, and places are crowded. I think one thing is that there's a whole lot of places you can go where there's not anybody. It may take a little research. You may have to drive a little further. I got no problem with driving an extra 30 minutes in the car or next extra 20 minutes in the boat to get away from the crowds if that's what it takes. But, when it's time to rally the troops to take care of some of this stuff we love so much, there's no denying the fact that more troops is a much better way to win a war than, a couple of guys out there on their own getting taken out by the first sniper. To throw a couple of war analogies out there.
Well, it's true. I mean, I think, and like I said, my day job is conservation, and in some ways it is a war. I mean, you got to have that mentality. And it's, my thought on conservation is like, you're not going to be willing to fight for something you don't love, if say some troops were coming through, like real troops, you'd fight to protect your family. And, but thanks to, just circumstance, I spent a lot of time as a kid outside, and I kind of fell in love with the outdoors, and that's led to my work in conservation. But I feel like, so the more people that can get out there and experience it, the better. I mean, what would be your advice? Because you do a lot of stuff with conservation. Like I know you were a Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation ambassador. Our mutual friend Jay Clayburg used to work there, and I know you're very plugged into that world. What can a normal person, like I'm not talking about a professional outfitter or somebody who's out, say somebody who's living in Austin, going to work in an office and they like to go out on the weekends. What would be your advice to somebody just to try to be more conservation minded or to kind of leave things a little better, if you have any?
I think the smallest little thing, something just as simple as taking a trash bag with you and making sure you fill it up before you go home. I mean, that, unfortunately, that's something we deal with. We fish, long part of our river is basically an urban fishery. So we're dealing with runoff from the city, that's one thing, and then there's just so many organizations, everywhere that I think just a little bit of research, internet search on, conservation in my city or conservation on this river or conservation there. You can probably find some cause that needs some type of help, whether it's financial, organizational, just showing up and showing a kid how to get in and out of a canoe. I just think that is another great thing about the internet is like all this stuff. If you have a desire to do anything, quick Google search and you can figure out how to get involved and how to do something. So, I think that the possibilities are endless, so as little or as much as you want to do to help out conservation wise, there's something out there. So yeah, it's tough. I mean, we do like our river cleanup and we try to make it like we bait everybody out, it's going to be a big party. We're going to have free beer. We're going to have prizes, come out and, somebody may tell you their secret spot on the river or maybe show you their favorite fly, that's kind of how we do it. We try to entice people with a good time, but, I don't think it's hard at all to find, some kind of cause to get involved with. And, you don't have to commit a whole lot of time or effort or energy or finances either,
Oh, yeah. Well, and that's the thing I've learned is that a lot of these nonprofits, they can stretch a dollar farther than about anybody. And so you give a $20 donation to a local conservation group, and that can go a long way. I don't want this conversation to end without a shout out to our buddy Rick Wittenbreaker and Howler Brothers because they're such good dudes. How'd you get connected with them?
So now Rick has a different email address now because he's got a Howler Brothers email address. But I still, and Rick probably still gets emails from me from my original email list, which started at the Austin Angler in probably 1999 or 2000. And so Rick was a customer at the Austin Angler, in the 90s or early 2000s. And so we've been, buddies, even if we didn't spend a lot of time together, we just kind of knew each other ever since those days. When Rick was at Yeti for years and he was kind of my guy over there, they all worked in the same little warehouse over in East Austin. So I'd go over there to get a cooler, and Rick was always there. Oh man, so when he went to when he ended up at Howler, actually one of their Howler first reps is a guy, Banning Collins. He's become quite the rep, fly fishing rep. I think he carries some hunting lines as well. Who was a kid who worked at the Austin Angler when he was in high school. Matter of fact, I think he claims that I was the person who was responsible for his poor career choice. he should be a high end construction company. He should be running a high end construction company, but instead he's a fly fishing rep. But anyway, Banning started giving me some Howler gear, and I really liked it. And so I just kind of, I guess I was wearing the stuff already, but way before, they had the ambassador thing going. I just got an email from Rick one day, like going, "Hey man, do you want to do this?" And I was like, "Hell yeah!" So, and Rick is just, he's just one of those just super nice people. I see a picture of Rick. It just makes me smile.
Same.
I see Rick in person. I'm just like in a good mood. But that whole crew over there is pretty awesome. I think everybody that's involved with that organization always seems to have a smile on their face. And I know running a business that's not the case, but all my interactions they're always super positive, and I just like the vibe. I like what they're doing, and I also like the gear they make. So that's really, really helpful.
I think they're marketing geniuses because they obviously, the gear speaks for itself, but being able to connect all these things that on the surface don't seem at all connected, whether, they bring in surfing and they bring in fishing, they bring in the Rocky Mountains, they bring in music. And it's kind of cool. It's kind of perfect for you because you bring all those things together too. So that's a good partnership, I would imagine. But those guys are awesome, man. Just kind, generous, and they make good stuff. Doesn't get better than that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's another kind of one of those magic Austin things. I don't know if that could happen anywhere else, but the music, the fishing, the clothing. I think that we got a little magic spark that makes things like that, happen here in Austin. Yeti's from Austin, and all these cool brands are here, and all these cool people. I'm just fortunate to be around them and absorbing the good vibes.
Well, I'm fortunate to be absorbing it through the internet, so thank you. Last question for you. Normally, I like to ask folks about good books they've read or books that have been important to them, and you can answer that if you want. But given your background in the music business, people also, they tell me, you need to ask more questions about music. And I took piano lessons for like 6 weeks, and my parents, it was like, when you went to college, you're like, this isn't for me, but it only took me 6 weeks. I was like, Mom and Dad, you're wasting money on this. Like, I'm not musical, but so I appreciate music, but I got no musical talent. So can you give us either some book recommendations or music recommendations?
So the music one is tough for me. And I had the same thing. My parents tried to force me to have culture.
Really?
Yeah. I had to take piano lessons, guitar lessons, ballet, tap, you name it, and I didn't want to do any of it. And my mom thought it was hilarious years later when I was singing in a band. So where I'm at musically right now is I'm trying to discover new music. So if anybody's got a suggestion, please throw that my way. Because there's like some statistic. Once you get past a certain age, you don't tend to listen to new music. You listen to the same stuff over and over again. And so my musical background is everything from, super heavy metal, punk rock, reggae now, which I was not a huge reggae fan younger because it was just too mellow for me back then. Gangster rap and like grunge. So I'm all over the place. My wife is a classic country fan, so I'll actually listen to that stuff as well. So it's hard for me to just come up with one thing. So like today, I'm listening to reggae dub instrumentals, like just like the most old school hardcore. And that kind of puts me in a mood. I will say this is because also a lot of my listening is news. I'm sort of a news junkie, but I have my new thing is I do not listen to news in the morning. I do not listen to news if I'm going fishing. So if I'm going fishing, the radio's on, I'm listening to some super chill reggae dub. I can't even give you a specific artist. This is like some pretty far out there, just, bass, drums, echo. And that just kind of puts my head in the right space. I must admit, I have been really lax on my reading. And I used to be a voracious reader. Like I read mostly history, like Western history, like all the Lewis and Clark stories, all that type of stuff, like exploration type stuff, all the stories of Shackleton and the Arctic explorers. And that was kind of my forte. Lately, like I said, I've kind of fallen off. I got a couple of books on my shelf right now. What is it? The Summer Moon Story.
Oh, that's a good one, man. You'll love that, especially in Texas.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So that one, that's probably my most recent favorite. I've read a few of the kind of weird stuff, like John Adams, the story.
Oh no, that's good stuff, man. We're on the same page there.
Okay.
I absorb that stuff, man.
Yeah, so I'm Benjamin Franklin. That's my next one. I haven't started on that yet.
The big thick one by yeah, I've got that one on my shelf, and I've tried to start it. And it's like, man, this is a commitment. I don't know if I can.
I'm in the same place. It's been sitting on the shelf for a while, but that's my next one.
One you might like is if you like that Empire of the Summer Moon. It's called Blood and Thunder, and it's by Hampton Sides, who I've had on this podcast a few times.
Yeah,
and it's about kind of Southwest. It's awesome.
Actually, I read Blood and Thunder years ago. Yeah, years ago. So, like I said, that was kind of my thing. Yeah, that title is the classic, Blood and Thunder.
That's good. Yeah,
and that kind of reminds me of some of my favorite music from back in the days. I mean, and we're talking like Slayer. That was, if I was going to listen to a rock band, it'd be Slayer, Metallica, or maybe Soundgarden. So yeah, my musical tastes are all over the place. Slayer 1 minute and Snoop Dogg the next, and then Bob Marley and some mellow reggae after that. So yeah, but that's once again kind of the Austin thing. We had a pretty eclectic music scene back when I was playing music. Like everybody just played together, which was kind of nice. That's kind of what I'm shooting for now. Let's all play together.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Well, this was so great. I knew it was going to be fun just because we had so many mutual friends, and I'm such a fan of everything you do. But it was just an awesome conversation. Keep up the good work, and hopefully we'll get to meet in person one of these days. But I really appreciate everything you do, and thanks for taking time, man. I know you're busy.
Yeah, man. No, it's fun. I have to force myself sometimes to sit down and do stuff, and this is great because all I have to do is sit down and talk, which that's just ask my wife. I'm good at talking.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number three, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number four, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out.
I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.